What's up, guys? So excited to hang out with you. This is Coach Alex Van Houten in Better Daily, and tonight we are in our April 2021 doing our fasting workshop. And I'm excited about this for a couple of reasons. One being that I've I've done a lot of coaching where I've incorporated fasting into the practice of individuals, but when it comes to a large scale workshop, that is a little more nuanced. And so this is our first shot at this. I'm really excited to bring this information to you and to talk through it with you in a practical and powerful way. And then also I'm excited about this because we are also dueling our recording here. So we've got this live in the Better Daily group. If you're joining me live in the app, what's up? How are you? And if you're joining me live in the Zoom area, I'm glad to have you as well. And so the way we're going to roll this thing is as I'm speaking on the topic of fasting, if questions come up for you, go ahead and write those down. You can drop them in the comments for Better Daily, or you can ask them. I'm going to give us about a halfway mark in the middle of the workshop and kind of open up the floor for questions, and then we'll continue through the content and then open up a discussion at the end as well. So I have a lot to bring to you this evening. I hope it's valuable to you. And if you're interested in making fasting potentially a part of your practice, or perhaps you've done some fasting in the past and maybe haven't decided whether or not it's powerful or good for your fitness practice, then I hope this gives you some things to work on that front. So here we go. Let's see. This evening's agenda, we're going to start with the question, what is fasting? I know, relatively simple. You just don't eat, right? Well, there's a little more to it than that. Then we're going to talk about the science, the research on fasting and what it can do for you. Then we're going to talk about some best practices and how to flex the fasting muscle, so to speak. Just like anything else, it's a skill that you can practice and get better at. And then we're going to talk through a training case study. So this is a client of mine that I've worked with in the past year, and fasting has been a significant part of his program. And perhaps you can learn from some of the things that he did in his journey. And then we're going to talk about some considerations to fast or not to fast. And so there might be some questions that evolve for you, and whether or not you're in one of those populations of people that fasting might not be a good thing for you, or certain types of fasting might not be a good thing for you. And so we'll talk about that as well. And then, like I said, at the end, we'll have an opportunity for an open discussion and Q&A. So first, real quick, this is, if you haven't caught it already, this is what we're doing in Better Daily in April. And I'm not going to walk through this. You guys are smart people. You can walk through this all by yourself. But you are here on the 8th, on the Thursday, with our fasting workshop. I did want to personally invite you guys to our group coaching session next week. That's the 13th on Tuesday. We're actually going to be talking about fasting specifically, but also with regard to what we're hoping to accomplish in our health and fitness goals, given that we have an entire quarter of the year under our belts. And so we have summer coming up, and I'd like that to be a positive strategy session before we jump into the Faithful 40 challenge. So if you guys can make it next Tuesday evening, it'll be an open forum discussion. It won't be a workshop where I'm teaching and you're asking questions. I'll be asking you questions, and we get to talk through some of those things from a practical perspective for you. So I'm really looking forward to that. So what is fasting? Fasting is a really interesting topic because it's gained a lot of traction in media in the health and fitness space over the past probably 8 to 10 years. And so it's when something gets a lot of traction or popularity, sometimes when I say fasting and somebody hears fasting, we don't mean the same thing. And so I want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. The word fast, fascinatingly enough, actually comes from an Old English, Dutch, German, and Norse word that means to hold fast or firm. So when you make the decision and say, I'm not going to consume food, there is, in the English, German, and Norse tradition, there is the concept of the willpower to hold firm. But it actually goes back even farther into ancient Sanskrit. It actually comes from pastyam, and how they got from pastyam to fast is a bunch of mental hula hoops, but it comes from the word pastyam, which actually means temple or dwelling place. And therein kind of lies the spiritual history of fasting in many spiritual traditions, and this isn't the topic of our conversation this evening, but in many spiritual traditions, fasting is a way to enter the temple or holy place, the place of mental clarity and separation from the physical world enough that perhaps maybe you could be in tune with the spiritual world. Again, that's not the topic of our conversation this evening. We're going to talk about fasting specifically from a health and fitness perspective. But I find this really fascinating because my personal history with regard to fasting actually started as a spiritual practice and still continues for me personally today as a spiritual practice. So I was very confused when about 8 years ago, one of my clients came to me and was like, "Hey, what about this intermittent fasting thing? Should I be doing it? I saw a special," and I'm like, "What? People are fasting and that's a fitness thing now? Like, that's really weird." So I was very confused about this, but the research that's come out of more and more people being aware of the idea that there's a fasting discipline and that it could be positive and powerful is why we have research to talk about this evening. So that'll be fun. Uh, Fasting really simply means to abstain from food or drink. Tonight, we're going to be specifically talking about abstaining from food. There are traditions in which you would abstain from water or other drinking sources, tea, coffee, that sort of thing. That's not going to be the scope of our conversation this evening. But another way to think about fasting is to hold one's body separate from the influences of consumption. And I prefer that definition of fasting a little bit better. That is to hold one's body separate from the influences of consumption. When we consume foods, changes happen in our brain, changes happen in our body, and we really don't get a say in that after the consumption of food. You know, how things affect our neurochemistry and how things affect our digestive system. We don't really get to turn any dials or pull any levers after we've eaten. We just get to deal with the after effects of what it is that we have eaten. And so fasting to hold one's body separate from the influences of consumption really means just, hey, I'm going to take me as a being and I'm going to separate that from the things that I consume for a period of time. And I'm going to exist in that state. And so uh, we we know this, like most of us have eaten breakfast almost every day of our lives, unless you're in a particularly busy season of life, or perhaps you're skipping it on purpose. You might skip breakfast, but lunch would technically be then your breakfast. And breakfast literally is break fast. It's the stopping of the overnight forced fast, because unless you just have a particularly loving or maybe maniacal spouse, I'm not really sure which, who's like feeding you while you sleep, then sleeping makes you fast. You don't get to you don't get to not you don't get to not fast while you sleep. I don't know anybody who's mastered that. Even my 2-year-old can't drink his milk and sleep at the same time. So it's similar to exercise. If you don't take anything else away from me tonight, I want you to know that fasting as a practice, similar to exercise, is a stressor that creates an adaptation in the body. And we've talked about this here in Better Daily. We've talked about this in previous Faithful 40 challenges, that stressors on the body turn on certain genes and cause them to be expressed, and they turn off certain genes and cause them not to be expressed, right? So last month, we talked specifically about cardiovascular exercise and how cardio as a modality is not about calories burned through running, but the changes that occur at the cellular level in our bodies because we've engaged in cardiovascular exercise, and that there are ways to do that that create certain adaptations, and ways to do that don't really create adaptations. So fasting, when you go without food, when you set yourself apart from the consummatory reward process, that actually does cause specific adaptations in the body. And when we're talking about the level of the DNA and changing the way the DNA responds for a period of time, that's where you get some of the really interesting and amazing benefits of fasting. So I've included on this slide just a few interesting books. If you're into understanding fasting a little bit more, there's a book by Dr. Jason Fung. He's probably the most outspoken purveyor of fasting as a practice right now in the health and fitness space. He's a nephrologist, that is a kidney doctor, and he not only does research but also treats several different illnesses through fasting. And his book, The Complete Guide to Fasting, it's a relatively cheap book. It's actually pretty long, but it's practical. It's an intelligent look at the issue. He has a few other books, they're a little more technical, but then there's an interesting one from a Christian perspective that's called Eat, Fast, and Feast, a Christian guide to fasting. That one's written by J.W. Richards, and it's endorsed by the Catholic Foundation, which I find really interesting. And then if you're looking for a textbook that looks at some of the mental processes or the psychological effects of fasting, there's an interesting textbook called The Highly Sensitive Brain. It's on my read list, but at the moment I have a lot of things on my read list, so I don't. And then I couldn't find this in its original cover, so I just brought it for show and tell. This is when I talked about coming to fasting from a spiritual perspective. The Celebration of Discipline by Richard J. Foster was the book that I originally read that covered fasting, and that book was actually written in the early 1900s, late 1800s. So it's a little bit of an older book. If you Amazon the Celebration of Discipline, they've changed the cover to like make it look more modern, and it's not a very modern book. It's old school, man. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, that's that. Well, I want to switch gears though away from the definition and talk about why do it. So why should we fast? If fasting is a potential tool in the tool belt of health and fitness, what are the things that have been researched to come out of a fasting practice that would be positive and beneficial to people? So this is actually, I've taken a lot of the research and have condensed it down to this list of potential benefits. And we're not done researching this, and we're not done finding out what happens when we as people just go without food for a period of time, and what happens on the inside of us. But it's pretty wild to note. Like if there was a supplement that could claim all of these things that I'm about to talk to you about, and that person would be rich, whoever invented that. Like, but what's really weird about fasting is that nobody's making money on it. Like, nobody makes any money on whether or not you eat today. Well, they make money on whether you eat. But if you don't eat today, actually, a lot of people lose money. So that's interesting, right? So there's, if there's a supplement that did this, a lot of people would buy it, and they would be happy and benefiting from it. But because it's fasting, because it's something you don't do instead of something you do, I had to say that once today. If because it's, I know I'm not that funny. Sorry, guys. But because it's something you don't do, it seems strange that there are positive and potential benefits to this. So first, we have growth hormone release. If you haven't heard about growth hormone, it's basically the natural fountain of youth in your body. And the growth hormone release that comes out of fasting actually begins at the 18-hour mark. So when you've gone without food for about 18 hours. This is a little bit different for everybody. This is plus or minus for everybody. There are some folks that, they're, when they fast, it takes up to 20 hours to get that growth hormone release. And some people, 12 hours, it's sufficient. But growth hormone is really interesting because it stimulates the creation of new cells. So like my boys right now, I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. My boys right now have significantly more, somewhere in the order of 800% more growth hormone in their bodies than I do. Why? Well, they're growing brain cells, and they're growing muscle, and they're growing bones, and they're growing skin cells, and their organs are turning over so fast. And so they're constantly in this state of development, right? So they're releasing growth hormone. That's what keeps their skin nice and supple and smooth. And that's what makes them heal so fast. If Gabriel gets a bruise on his shins, and they're constantly bruised. My children look like I beat them. I don't. The gravity beats them. But they heal from those things so fast. Whereas, me, I bump my shin on something and it's like purple for a couple days. And it's, I heal relatively quickly. I'm a fit guy, but at the same time, I heal way slower than they do because of growth hormone. They're like Wolverine, right? So that said, we've got a couple of people joining us live on the app. What's up, guys? Glad to have you in our fasting workshop. The growth hormone release from fasting is pretty powerful because without consuming food, you initiate and ignite that same process that my boys are going through that helps them to heal quickly and do positive and powerful things with their body overnight, right? So that's one of the benefits of fasting. This has been studied in every single population. Growth hormone is released by fasting around 18 hours, give or take, plus or minus 2 to 4 hours, depending on the person. And the reason I say that is we'll talk a little bit more later about glycogen stores when we talk about side effects like headache and energy lulls and that sort of thing. But some folks don't enter a fasted state as quickly as others. So then there's detoxification. When you fast, at a certain point, you enter a state in which your body's no longer running on your digested food. The energy coming into your body to allow it to do different processes and whatnot, it's no longer coming from digested food. It's actually being released or created from the release of triglycerides that you're holding on to. So the fat that you're holding on to, right? The fat on your arms and the fat in your midsection, and most primarily your visceral body fat. That is any fat that's accumulated around your liver, your pancreas, your gallbladder, that pocket of fat in your midsection. That's where fasting's pulling triglycerides to allow you to use that energy. Well, what's really interesting about the release of those triglycerides to be used as energy is that our body also stores toxins that we are exposed to, that we breathe, that we eat, that we drink, that seep through our skin. Many of those toxins are fat soluble. And so, there's a lot out there about detox teas and, detox capsules and stuff. I'm not here to crap on those necessarily, but they purport to pull toxins out of you. And one of the potentially hokey claims about being able to detox you is that unless your body is actively releasing the triglycerides that those toxins are wrapped up in, that they've dissolved in, then your body's going to have a really hard time actually detoxing you. Your liver does great work detoxing you. Your kidney does great work detoxing you. Your kidneys, if you're blessed enough to have both of them, your kidneys do great work detoxing you. They don't need your help. What they do need, however, is for your body to let go of those fat soluble toxins. And so one of the things that happens, and this has been studied when they test excretions during fasting, like urination and whatnot, there's a higher level of fat soluble toxins in the excretions of an individual. So large intestine, that's a two-way street. So you can defecate the toxins that have been stored in your fat cells, and then similarly you can also sweat some of those off and pee them out and all that good stuff. So that's really positive and powerful. So the release of triglycerides accompanied by fasting lets those fat soluble toxins go, and your body can actually deal with them and move them out. Mental health is also a powerful part of fasting. So endorphins in those who are fasting, 18 again, it seems to be about the magic number, 18 to 20 hours, is that those who are in a fasted state actually have a higher level of endorphins. Now, endorphins are a strange neurochemical. One of the things we'll talk about later is if you've had disordered eating in your history, things like anorexia nervosa or bulimia, one of the things that can happen is you can become addicted to a fasted state. It feels so good to not be eating that it triggers something in the brain of somebody who might be prone to addictions that makes them not want to eat. And that can be problematic, because it's one thing to get the benefits of fasting on purpose. It's another thing to be addicted to not eating. That's a completely different can of worms. And then there's the digestive health aspect. So when it comes to not eating, one of the things that happens is you kind of get to shut the factory down. Your stomach doesn't have to work, your small intestine doesn't have to work, your gallbladder doesn't have to work, your pancreas doesn't have to work. Well, still has to excrete insulin, but not much of it, right? So everything gets to kind of shut down. I have a buddy of mine who is an engineer, and I was like, oh wow, engineering. I have a background in engineering. I went to school at Vanderbilt University, undergraduate degree in engineering, and I loved it, like super cool. What do you do? And he's like, oh, I run a cardboard factory. So he's like, it's like the least cool engineering you can do. But anyway, they have to shut down the factory every probably 5 to 6 months everything shut down, no cardboard made in this factory, everything shut down, so that they can go through and repair all of the things that broke in the last 5 to 6 months. Because there's no place in the, like, if you shut one machine down, the other machine can't run. Like, it can't be spitting stuff out while this machine shut down so that you can, you know, keep producing cardboard. And so they actually do this. They shut it down for like 4 days, and he works like a dog for 4 days, fixing everything that broke down in the last 5 to 6 months, and then they move on. And the same exact things happen in your digestive system when you fast. So when you're eating, when you have a constant 3 meals a day, 4 meals a day, 5 meals a day, lots of snacks, whatever in between, your digestive system never gets a break. Like, your digestive system is constantly working. And so kind of like my buddy's factory, every once in a while it needs to shut down so that it can be repaired. And there's a complicated process of ketogenesis that happen at the level of intestinal tract cells that encourages rejuvenation and healing and whatnot, that I intend not to get into unless you guys want to this evening. But just know this is something that they've found with regard to studying digestive issues, particularly irritable bowel syndrome, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease. Each of those things are actually benefited by a period of fasting, and inflammatory markers in each of those diseases go down significantly during a period of fasting and then thereafter. So it's a robust effect. Another thing that happens, obviously, is fat loss. If you're not eating anything, guess what your body gets to eat? You. So the fat that you've stored can actually be used, excuse me, can actually be used as energy in the different processes in the body. And then we've got reduced joint inflammation. We're not really sure why this is the case. One of the things that has been postulated is that fasting actually switches some of the inflammatory markers, interleukin 6 and interleukin 3 specifically in the DNA. Fasting seems to downregulate the production of those inflammatory cytokines, meaning that when you've gone without food for a period of time, whatever it is that's been causing that rheumatoid arthritis, the inflammatory degradation of joints, elbows, knees, hips, back, the inflammatory markers being downregulated actually reduces the local inflammation at those joints. And so those who have experienced the effects of rheumatoid arthritis and even lupus have reported benefits from fasting for particular periods of time. And then there's this fancy word. If you Google fasting, you'll find it eventually. Autophagy. You can say it in the comfort of your own home right now. Autophagy. I almost said it wrong. Autophagy. When I first came across this word in my head, I don't know if you guys do this, but I pronounce things wrong. Like the name Phoebe, Pheobe. For the longest time, I was like, Phoebe? Phoebe? Who's Phoebe? But it's Phoebe. So autophagy looks like autophagy, and it's not. It's autophagy. So autophagy is the name given to the healing process that happens in tissues in the body that turn over old cells. And so what I've said here in the bullet point is that the body's energies are shifted from the process of new incoming material. So we're not eating anymore, right? We're not trying to take what we've eaten and integrate it into the body. That system's shut down. So what can we do? Well, we can deal with the tissues that are currently here and do some turnover, get rid of old cells, clean out some inflammatory cytokines, get rid of some of the inflammatory markers, some of the free radicals that exist, the toxins and stuff. We're just kind of cleaning house. We're getting rid of that. It's spring, right? Has anybody done any spring cleaning? You get up in the attic and you deal with stuff in the cupboards, and you throw some crap out of your yard that doesn't need to be there anymore, and you're like, finally, because it was winter. Who does that in the winter? I know a few strange people who do that in the winter, but I don't like to do it in the winter. Spring cleaning is spring cleaning. And the same thing happens with regard to fasting. Is autophagy is the cellular process that allows our body to rejuvenate and heal current tissues. And then last but not least, I put just an interesting list here that we're looking at research on skincare. We're looking at research on enhanced cancer treatment. It actually turns out that while you're fasted, chemotherapy works better, which is very interesting. By better, I mean it shrinks tumors better. Heart health markers improve with fasting. Triglycerides, total cholesterol to HDL ratio, LDL particle size. Mental clarity, most people who are going through a fasting practice also talk about the mental clarity aspect, which is probably linked to that whole spiritual thing I was talking about. And then there's more to it than that. There's a lot of really interesting things that have been proposed to be positive benefits of fasting, and we'll talk about the research in a second. Um, but I feel like I've been talking a lot. I want to open up the floor to questions before we get into just some of the research that you might be interested in reviewing for yourself, and I'll talk through that with you in a moment. But if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself on Zoom or drop them here in the application, and I'd be happy to uh, talk through those. So I'll just pause for a minute here and let the questions fly before we get to research and practicing and case study. Apparently, I've eaten chocolate ice cream while sleeping, she says. That's in the app. That would be a feat. I mean, I do know some people who like to sleepwalk and eat, but I haven't quite figured that life hack out. No questions. I have a question from the group that says, "Hey, what about fasting and menopause hormones? How does it differ with menopause?" And then I have another question: how can you determine the best fasting time? So we'll actually get to the fasting time question in a second. That'll be this slide just as a quick preview, so you know I'm not yanking your chain here. We're going to talk about fasting times specifically on the next slide. But the menopause and hormones question is really interesting. So one of the populations that we'll talk about is a special consideration is females of childbearing age. That with regard to fasting, it's probably contraindicated to be beneficial on a regular basis, meaning that the way the female hormone system responds to fasting during your childbearing years. And when I say childbearing, I mean like if your body's capable of producing children somewhere between the ages of 14 and 15, time of first menarche, and then to menopause, that 40-ish, somewhere in there, maybe 45, depending on how quickly or I don't know, drawn out your menopausal process is. Everybody's different. It's a party. Ladies, you have a party when it comes to hormones for sure. But during that period of time, the female hormone system does not respond very favorably to fasting. And with regard to the fasting research, it's really, really hard to find a positive study for women of childbearing age that parsed all that out, right? About the only research that we can depend on is research done on Ramadan Muslims. And so like Ramadan is a holy month in the Islamic tradition where it doesn't matter who you are, unless you're a child. I believe there's a certain age. I'm sorry if you're of an Islamic background, you're like, come on, man. But there's a certain age at which you start fasting. Doesn't matter, man, woman, who you are, and you fast from sunup to sundown. And what they've found with the studies they've done on childbearing age females is that fasting from sunup to sundown actually slows down their metabolism, lowers growth hormone, and increases the stress hormone cortisol. And that's directly the opposite of the effects that they find on the men, which actually seems to increase growth hormone, increase testosterone, and lower cortisol. So for whatever reason, there seems to be a difference between men and women when you look at childbearing age females. Now, outside of that, when it comes to menopause, I have worked with many clients, female, in the past who have been during menopause and post-menopause and have reported that it has positive benefits. As far as looking at menopausal females, either perimenopause, that's during the process of menopause, or thereafter, where you're no longer wrestling with the estrogenic compounds of your ovaries, then there's not a lot of good research on just that cohort, that demographic. I mean, the largest fasting study ever done up until this point has been 5,000 people, and that was from a bunch of different walks of life. But it was not parsed out by male, female. It was not parsed out by menopause or perimenopause. And so, what I found in ladies of perimenopausal age and then postmenopausal age is that the fasting affects them much more similarly to my male clients than it does my female clients of childbearing age. And so I can assume that from a hormonal perspective, it's affecting them more positively than it was, 20 years prior for themselves. And the only caveat to that I would say is with regard to thyroid hormone. So there are many menopausal or postmenopausal females who are being treated for thyroid dysfunction of some sort. There's a difference between I had my thyroid removed and I have to take pills that mimic my thyroid versus I have a thyroid, it doesn't work as well as it could, so I take a little bit of thyroid hormone to kind of boost it, right? And so that being said, the only caveat there is tracking thyroid hormone as your fasting program progresses. We'll talk a little bit more about different types of fasting, but I would put menopausal females in that category of people who, unless you're doing some heavy hormone replacement therapy, fasting makes a lot of sense to at least give a shot and see how your body and mind respond well to it. Hormonally speaking, I can't think of anything negative that would come out of that unless you're wrestling also with intense thyroid issues. Okay, good. And then the other question I have up here from the group is, what are my thoughts about intermittent fasting long term? I'm about to share that with you. So stay tuned and get excited. So on this slide, what you'll notice is I've provided, I talked about a lot of research with fasting, and you're like, hey man, you only got 2 links. That's not a lot of research. These links are dense. Okay, so the first link is from, well, it's not from nutritionschool.org. It's actually from the largest fasting study conducted. And then the YouTube video is actually a YouTube review with the doctor who did it. She's an Ayurvedic medicine doctor, which is an East Indian tradition of medicine. And what she does is she helps patients deal with things like diabetes or kidney disease or Crohn's disease, that sort of thing. And she does it in kind of a holistic way. There's a lot more to it than like, here's a pill, you should take that, it might make you feel better. So she actually, her clinic was the one that conducted the large scale study in conjunction with a few other doctors. And what they found was pretty fascinating. I put the summary of that research down here for your perusal. You got the show notes, I'm a podcast junkie, sorry guys. You got the slide notes in your email just prior to this conversation, and if you can't find those, let me know. This will be in the group as well. But they found very, very interesting things, particularly that most people who in the clinic reported having a health issue they were wrestling with, things like chronic fatigue or depression or anxiety or diabetes, the vast majority, somewhere in the neighborhood of 82% of them, saw a significant improvement in what they thought was ailing them. And these individuals in this study, they did a fasting practice for 8 weeks, and they got to choose whether it was a 2 to 5 day fasting practice or a 10-day fasting practice. And so that's a significant difference. If you said, hey Alex, how long do you want to go without food just to see what happens, you got to be really brave to be like, you know what, about 2 weeks, that sounds good, like let's see how that goes. Like, and so a lot of these individuals were in a place where they're like, look, I've tried everything else, might as well, like, and I'll drop a few pounds, so that'll be cool. Anyway, very, very fascinating set of research. And then I've also linked a video to an hour-long seminar by Dr. Jason Fung, and he goes through a large amount of research. And I figured that would probably be more beneficial to you than dropping like 30 cited research articles here. And it looks like I'm gonna go switch on my surge protector before my computer dies on you guys. So, like, think fasted thoughts. I'll be right back. There we go. Brief interlude. No big deal. Power's back on. Nothing's gonna die in the process. All right, sweet. So the research is really interesting. There are a lot of benefits to this thing. The question is, what do you do about that? Like, is it positive or beneficial for you to start a fasting practice? What about intermittent fasting? That those are all really good questions. And so what I've done for you here is there's an infinite number of ways that you can go without food. Turns out when I say fast and somebody else says fast, some people talk about intermittent fasting, which is the regular practice of skipping breakfast, sometimes even lunch. In some people, when they talk about fasting, means that they only drink, like, I don't know, orange juice and vegetable broth. Or some people, when they fast, it's, I have one meal, but I don't eat any other meals. And some people, when they fast, it's like I drink only water, and that's that. So today, what we're going to be talking about, when I say fast, I mean coffee, tea, or water, and nothing else. That's what fasting means. Now, there's other ways to fast, fine. There's other time restricted eating and nutrient supported fasting, that sort of stuff. There are other ways to fast, but when we're talking about fasting in this context, coffee, tea, or water, and nothing else. Um, Electrolytes for those of you who are sticklers, if that's a thing. So that said, I've created kind of a stepping stone from kind of beginner fasting to what I would consider a more advanced way of fasting. she she says in the group, I tried to think fasted thoughts, but I came up empty. Nice dad joke. That kudos. Thanks for that. So that was good. That was good. So on the left here, you'll see intermittent fasting. This is what's gotten the majority of press or media or retention over the past few years. In intermittent fasting, what is it? It's observing a fasting and feeding window, really. So you might have heard of a 12-12. That's 12 hours of eating or 12 hours of meal times, and then 12 hours of not eating, right? So that would be like you eating dinner at 8 p.m. tonight and not eating again till 8 a.m. tomorrow. So this sort of fasting window is commonly recommended when it comes to problems with nighttime snacking and eating, right? So like, Alex, I have a real problem with ice cream in the middle of the night. How do I deal with that? A 12-12 intermittent fasting practice is kind of a helpful way to think about that. And then some people do an 18-6, which would be like, again, if you had dinner, I said dinner at 8 p.m. I don't know who eats at 8 p.m. We eat at like 5 p.m. in our house. So let's say I had dinner at 5 p.m., right? 12 hours later is 5 a.m. And then 6 more hours after that would be 11 a.m. So if I had dinner tonight at 5 p.m. and then I ate tomorrow at 11, that would be an 18-6 intermittent fasting time period. And then there's a 24, which is, 20 hours of not eating. And you guys get the idea, right? The pros to intermittent fasting is that it's a simple stepping stone of time period constraints. If you've never fasted before, intermittent fasting is a helpful stepping stone. And it's medically acceptable for most conditions. If you're being treated for diabetes, blood pressure, thyroid issues, I mean, there's no doctor anywhere, or at least not that I can think of. There are two issues I can possibly think of that you're being treated for that your doctor would tell you to wake up in the middle of the night and eat something, otherwise it won't go well for you. One of those is called glycogen storage disease, and I've never met anybody who has that. But anyway, that said, there's really no medical reason why you can't go without food for 12 hours or 18 hours or 20 hours unless your prescription specifically says take with food. So it's usually medically acceptable for most conditions. You don't really need to talk to anybody about whether or not that's okay. Cons, on the other hand, the body adapts to consistency. So coming back to Joel's question earlier from the group where he was saying, hey, what about consistent daily intermittent fasting? What do you think about that? I think that it's a positive practice to get used to fasted periods of time. It's a much lower barrier to entry to go 18 hours without food. That's like I skip breakfast and I eat a late lunch versus saying I'm not going to eat today. And for those of you who've never fasted before, that can be a scary proposition. I'm not going to eat today. So intermittent fasting can be a nice stepping stone. The thing about it is that the body adapts to consistency. So if you do this every day, you skip breakfast, you skip lunch, then what happens is in the beginning, you'll notice some adaptations. Maybe your body will get better at burning fat as a fuel source. Maybe you'll kind of nix some of those crummy habits you have around lunchtime in the workplace, for instance. It's very possible you'll see some beneficial things happen because of that. But after about 2 or 3 weeks of doing this on a regular basis, your body is not stupid. It goes, hey, this guy doesn't eat at these times in the day, but during this time of the day, he eats whatever we need to eat. And so a lot of people who've tried this is called the OMAD diet. That's one meal a day, who have gone 20 hours without eating, and then they have a 4 hour feeding window. Their body's like everything but the kitchen sink, and they're just you'd be amazed at how much you can eat in one meal. Well, you probably wouldn't be amazed. I'm sure most of us have dealt with that. But that said, this is, in my opinion, this is one of the biggest bad adaptions is folks who have taken this intermittent fasting press and media and made a practice out of it, for long periods of time, like 3 months, 6 months. They're never eating breakfast and never eating lunch and eating one meal a day and stuff. And they'll see some results for a short period of time, but it doesn't last. And then what really stinks about that is you've taught your body how to be hyper efficient with your fuel. So you might feel low energy in the morning, and you might get extremely hungry at night, and it's really hard to break those sorts of cycles that you create through your mealtime. So I generally don't recommend regular intermittent fasting. I actually released a podcast recently where I told people that I recommend intermittent fasting, meaning that if your body doesn't know what to expect, then it can't adapt to it. So fasting, once or twice a week is in my opinion way more beneficial than fasting every day, from an intermittent fasting perspective. And then another con with intermittent fasting is that a low carb dietary practice is pretty required in order to create autophagy. That is to say, our glycogen stores, that's the amount of carbohydrates that your muscles can store. Our glycogen stores can last for about 18, maybe even 20 hours if you have a lot of it. And sorry, it's not just in your muscles, it's in your liver as well. And so if you're intermittent fasting, but you're eating a moderate to high carbohydrate diet, you're not actually entering any states of ketosis or autophagy because you never run out of carbohydrates, meaning your body never enters a fasted state. So I've worked with clients that it takes them about 18 to 20 hours before they're finally fasting, before their body has finally reached a point where it's burned through everything that has been stored to be used, not the fat. Fat's a long-term fuel source, but it's burned through all the glycogen, and now finally you're fasted. Now the fasting benefits actually start. And so with regard to intermittent fasting, to get positive benefits from that, you have to be eating a relatively low carbohydrate diet to keep your glycogen stores from being too full, for you to see any of the benefits for fasting. So I think of intermittent fasting as a positive stepping stone, kind of a beginner stepping stone in fasting. But I think that if you're working to develop a fasting practice, to get some of the benefits from the things that I spoke about earlier, then intermittent fasting is not where you should stop. It's just a starting point there. So that said, then there's protein supported fasting. This is the next stepping stone up with regard to a fasting practice. This is the practice of consuming about 30 to 60 grams of protein during a 24-hour fasted period. So this is saying, hey, I'm not going to eat today, but I'm going to have a protein shake around lunchtime, or I'm going to have a protein shake around dinner time. The pros of this is that it's less difficult from a hunger and energy perspective, with generally little side effects. Those who have not fasted before might get headaches or an extreme energy low in the middle of the day, kind of when they run out of their glycogen stores and their body's like, how now, brown cow? What do we do with this? And so that unlearned skill, metabolically speaking, the fact that your body hasn't been hungry for a while, and hasn't turned on those specific pieces of your DNA, the protein supported fasting can be a beneficial kind of bridge to make it suck less. So the protein supported fasting has been studied to bequeath many of the benefits that we talked about earlier. The cons is it's not a true break for the digestive system. Your digestive system still has to process what it is that you intake. Now, if you take in a like a whey protein concentrate, for instance, that is a full amino acid profile, but pre-digested protein. So it's not really hard on the digestive tract. You're not asking your digestive tract to do a lot of work on your fasting day. So it's not a true break, but it's still kind of a break. And then it's unclear if the autophagic activity is affected, meaning that we've studied, and I say we, the scientific community has studied that protein supported fasting can still result in fat loss, can still result in mental clarity, can still result in some of the rejuvenating effects on the digestive system, some of those benefits we talked about earlier, but it's not clear whether or not it hampers the autophagic effect. So let's say a full 24 hours with nothing but water, tea, and coffee gives you this much autophagy. The question is, does protein supported fasting give you the same amount of autophagy, or is it slightly less? We don't know that. And then the other thing is that it's a good medical intermediate. So if there is a medical reason why going without food for a period of time is a problem for you, protein supported fasting is usually the the solution. So the 24-hour period without food, generally you can do a protein supported fast. Now, if you're of sufficient age that you've been asked to do a colonoscopy, then you've been asked to fast for 24, maybe even 36 hours, and drink some strange liquid that you're going to need to clear yourself out and prep the whole process and system for what you're about to go through. That said, there are very few medical reasons why somebody would say, oh, don't prep for your colonoscopy. You can't do a colonoscopy because you're unprepped for it. So we'll talk about those considerations in a second, but protein supported fasting could be that bridge for any of you who have medical reasons why going without food for a time could be not very beneficial. Now, 24 to 40 hour fasting, this is, in my mind, what a typical positive fasting practice could be for somebody, 1 to 4 times per month. So 24 to 40 hours, in my mind, this is really the gold standard for a normal fasting practice. And by normal, I mean it's not extreme. So what is it? It's water, tea, and or coffee for only 24 to 40 hours. The pros is it's an effective trigger for literally all fasting benefits. There are very few benefits to fasting much longer than 24 to 40 hours. There are no scheduling changes required. Part of intermittent fasting and time restricted eating is you're kind of dealing with a clock, and 24 to 40 hours is kind of nice. You wake up in the morning and you're like, I'm not eating today. And that's the end of that. So you don't eat today. And then it's a simple mindset. So, with regard to intermittent fasting or protein supported fasting, there's still some decisions to be made. The only decision to be made with a 24 to 40 hour fast is don't put food in your mouth. It's pretty simple. I know it sounds, if you've never fasted before, it sounds weird, but it is pretty simple. It's also kind of nice. You don't have to make any decisions today about what you are or aren't going to eat, or whether or not you need to bring snacks with you, or where you're going to stop for dinner, because you just don't have to. The cons is it takes time to develop the skill. Very few people I've ever worked with can just do a 24-hour fast and not hate every minute of it. It's kind of like exercise, like if you haven't done a lot of weightlifting, coming to my house and doing my workout with me is probably not going to be a positive or powerful experience for you, because the entire time you're going to be like, when is this stupid workout going to be over? This is awful. You do this for fun? What's wrong with you? Like that. It's, you don't go from 0 to 120 without shifting a few gears in between, right? And it's not just a mental game, it's also a biological game. There are things that have to happen in your body to tell the body, oh, hey, we're going without food for a little bit. It's not a stressful thing. Turn these things on, turn these things off. Let's heal the digestive tract. Let's get some growth hormone in here. Let's get some mental clarity on, and boom, we're in a good spot. It can result in some side effects. So most of the time when people experience side effects from fasting, things like headache or energy lulls and stuff, it's their first few times doing a 24 to 40 hour fast. And then it might require some planning around activities or training. If you have a particularly intense work day or a particularly hardcore workout yesterday or today planned, fasting is probably not a good idea. In those states, there are some things that are best to do in a fed state, and planning your fast around around that can be a thing. And then there's extended fasting. I don't intend to talk about that this evening unless somebody's interested in that, but these are really anything over 40 hours is considered an extended fast. The pros of this are, all those benefits we talked about. It kind of turns the dial up on all of them. The inflammatory thing, the Ayurvedic doctor I talked about earlier, she was like, hey, you have rheumatoid arthritis and you want to feel some relief, don't eat until your joints stop hurting. Like, she was saying that in one of her talks. And I know that sounds crazy, but if you've wrestled with rheumatoid arthritis and you just want your knee to stop pounding, like, you're like, okay, I can do that. I would just really love for this pain to go away so I can sleep. And so that said, um, the extended fast is, from a study perspective, maximizing those benefits. The cons are it really requires mastery of a fasting practice. You can't be like a newbie and be like, I'm not going to eat for a week. That's intense. That there's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot of mindset. There's a lot of planning. There's a lot of support. It could be contraindicated for pharmaceutical interventions. So if you're on things like blood pressure medication, cholesterol medication, thyroid medication, a bunch of different medications require, or not really require, it's just that they're not studied in a fasted state. And so most doctors would tell you, hey, don't don't try to fast for a 24-hour or longer period while you're on this medication. And then it does require the cessation of training. When it comes to fasting, you can do 24 to 40-hour fasts as a part of a training week. You gotta kind of be smart where your workouts are and stuff. But as far as an extended fast goes, if you're gonna go 3 days or 5 days, like that sort of thing, like, you're not lifting weights during this time. You're not going for runs. You're not trying to break any land speed records. You're doing a lot of walking if you're active. And probably not a lot either. So that's kind of what all that looks like. I wanted to bring this home with a case study. So this is a gentleman I've trained. He was sharing his progress recently, and so this was from the past year. And what you'll see on the left is where we started in March of 2020, and what you'll see on the right is where we are in April of 2021. This gentleman came to me when he was 354 pounds. He had lost 30 pounds himself, so he was 384, dropped 30 pounds himself, and had hit a plateau. He was currently eating 1,500 calories a day, and so we started our training program then. The first thing I did is I increased his caloric intake significantly, so 1,800 to 2,000 calories a day with balanced macronutrients. And then we cycled his personalized training, Foundations Through Athleticism, every 3 to 5 weeks. But he fasted 1 day per week, a 24 to 40-hour fast. He fasted 1 day per week for 30 out of 52 weeks in the past year. So you'll see on the left, he was 354 pounds. On the right there, he's 296. That's a total weight loss of just about 60 pounds, 58 pounds. And in that time frame, what I want you to notice is he actually had a net caloric increase in his intake. So eating 1,500 calories a day, 7 days a week, is 10,000 calories a week. Eating 2,000 calories a day, 6 days a week, is actually 12,000 calories a week. So he's actually eating 2,000 calories a week more on my program after he had lost 30 pounds himself and plateaued, but he saw continued weight loss through the process, right? So again, coming back to this idea that fasting from a health and fitness perspective, it's not just about, oh, if I don't eat, I'm burning calories, I'm not eating. It's creating adaptations that are beneficial from a metabolic perspective. And he would tell you, we still have progress to make. We still have a ways to go. You don't go from 380 pounds to his goal weight. You don't do that in a short period of time, at least not if you want to sustain it. He's played that game before, right? But he's making significant progress. With a trained eye looking at these pictures, you can see that he's lost a significant amount of midsection fat. He's actually starting to see some definition in his upper body and his lower body. He's increased all of his strength markers. His VO2 significantly increased. He's reduced pain in his joints, and all those things. All these things have been positive. And I'm not saying that it's just because of the fasting, but it was a powerful and important part of his process. I was like, hey man, look, I would really prefer if you're interested in this caloric deficit thing, that we focus on one solid day of it rather than trying to spread that out over the week. It's going to change us for the better, and it's not going to hamper your metabolic process. And so we still have some work to do. And but he says that this fasting practice has been an extremely important part of this process, and he would credit it with his continued beneficial and sustainable weight loss. So I'll talk about considerations in a second, but I want to open up the floor to questions. So I've said a lot of things. I've talked about stepping stones from intermittent fasting perspective to extended fasting. I've talked about a case study. I've talked a bit about the research and whatnot. And so before I say, hey, these people can't do this or shouldn't do this, and what other considerations there are out there, I want to make sure that I answer your questions because we're coming up on time here. So I'm going to scroll through here on our app live and see if I missed anything, any questions that came up. And then if you're on Zoom, very welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question as well.
Alex, what's the easiest protein to digest if we're going to go that route?
Yeah, great question. The question is, what's the easiest protein to digest if we're going to go the protein supported fasting route? If you don't have problems with dairy, I love whey, WHEY, whey protein concentrate. It's relatively inexpensive. It's a complete protein. The way it comes, whey comes, it's pre-digested, meaning that it hits your bloodstream relatively quickly and your digestive system doesn't have to work very hard at it. So if you do well with dairy, whey is a good alternative. If you don't do well with dairy, you can try a goat whey.
Okay.
That exists now. Doesn't taste quite as good. It's not bad. It doesn't taste quite as good. But for many people who have a problem with dairy, the milk proteins in goat whey isn't as rough on them. And then good old fashioned Greek yogurt can also be beneficial. Your non-fat Greek yogurt, you can just eat. That's casein is what that is. It's cheap casein.
Yeah.
So those are generally what I recommend. If you're looking for like a vegan or plant-based option, most pea proteins and rice proteins are good blends. They have some really great blends now. About 8 years ago, they were terrible. I wouldn't recommend them. They tasted awful, but they exist now and they're good. And they do make your digestive system work a little harder for it though. So
how about like the broth?
What's that?
How about like the bone broth, things like that? How's that?
Yeah, like your collagen-based peptides and stuff. They have those supplementations, and I've actually heard of bone broth fasting, but it's very hard to get 30 grams of bone broth protein in your system. Like that's actually kind of a big volume of bone broth because it's not very concentrated. Like it's not bad for you or anything, but
right.
It might be the added benefit if you've got some good bone broth, some good organic bone broth, then
I do.
That's something you can have 3 meals of that in your fasting day, and that could be beneficial as well.
Okay.
Good question. That seems like a great option if that's amenable to you.
Yeah, I actually throw it in my coffee sometimes because it's good.
Boom.
Grams of protein.
There you go. Awesome. From the group, let's see. Volume of liquid. What volume of liquid do you recommend during a 24 to 36 hour fast? That's a really good question. I don't know if it's because I've been doing this for a while or what. I don't like to measure things when I fast. I just like to make sure I'm not thirsty. So that said, I tend to drink a lot more water when I fast. And I don't know if it's because I'm hungry and that's the one thing I can put in my mouth at the time. Like, I'm hungry at lunchtime or whatever. I'm going to drink a, 1.5 liters of water or what. So as far as recommendations are concerned, there's not like a studied, hey, if you fast, you should, have 10 fluid ounces per pound of body weight or something. It's that would be a lot of water. But anyway, that doesn't exist. That said, I do find that I drink more water when I fast. So I would recommend not letting yourself get too thirsty. And if if that comes up for you, you're really thirsty, but you're still drinking water, get yourself a little bit of electrolytes. Like, that'll help. You can add a little sea salt to your water if you're cheapo like I am, or you can, there's some good electrolyte supplements out there and stuff. You can add a scoop to it and go on your merry way. So good question. It not less than when you're not fasting. Like, at least drink as much water as you do when you're in a fed state. Good question.
What's a great meal like when you're coming off a fast? Like, fast all day and you're gonna have dinner that night. What's some things that would, be a good option? Because, especially when you're first starting, it's tempting to go after all the stuff that,
Yeah, Domino's pizza. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Sometimes you don't make good choices when you're hungry. So
Yeah, well, if you want to feel like crap, if you want to feel like total crap after your fast, eat a big old pizza right afterward. Yeah, that'll do it.
Well, we'll be back. You get to see it twice.
So depending on how long you fast, right? So if you're fasted 24 hours, then you're really not going to have a lot of restrictions on what you can reintroduce into your digestive tract. And so that's actually one of the reasons why I like to extend that 24-hour fast to that 36 or 40 hour, because I would rather break fast with breakfast foods. That's a personal vendetta. I'd rather have eggs after a fast than but that said, if you're fasting longer, then this becomes more important. If you've gone 3 days, maybe even 5 days, you got to go slow, man. You got to reintroduce things. It's like having the stomach bug. Okay, that's a bad visual, but fasting is not like having a stomach bug. But coming off of a fast, the same way you would eat after having had a stomach bug, that's how you should eat coming off of a fast, because your digestive system is fragile, and that's not. It's restored, but it's not. The factory's not on. You don't shut down the cardboard factory, fix all the machines, and go, all right, full tilt. You're like, hey man, let's make sure we got all the nuts and bolts in place. Let's do a couple practice rounds before we go to the main event. So that said, a lean protein, some light, well cooked vegetables. Like, don't go raw broccoli and carrots on yourself. That's a lot of uncooked fiber that you're gonna have to wrestle with. A lean protein, some well cooked vegetables, and maybe a nice soft grain on the side, something like brown rice, something like lentils, quinoa, even white rice in this case. And from a portion perspective, I know you're hungry, but your stomach is also shrunk. Yes. If you've gone without food for 24, 36, even more hours, your stomach is shrunk. So pounding a bunch of food in that time is you might be surprised. The first couple of times I fasted, I was surprised that I wasn't more hungry when I sat down to a meal. Everything just tasted better. Like, I like to say in my house that hunger is the best seasoning. But that that's a conversation for another day when you're trying to get a 2-year-old to eat his food. I don't like this broccoli, Dad. Well, hunger is the best seasoning. Put that in the fridge and bring it back out when you're hungry. But anyway, so true story. But the amount of food that you eat shouldn't be too different from your normal meal at like dinner time or lunchtime or breakfast. And then if you want to eat more after you've had your dinner, you've had a chance to kind of relax, maybe go for a walk, drink a little more water, make sure everything settles fine, then sure, have a second helping and stuff, but don't go right into it. Don't like, oh man, it's been a long time since I had dinner, I should probably shovel it in. Don't do that to yourself. I don't want you feeling like garbage, and certainly don't want you seeing your food twice. So that's a really good question.
Okay, thanks.
So coming back to that, well-cooked veggies, a nice lean protein. You don't want like a big juicy. I know you want a big juicy burger. Don't do it. You'll regret it.
No.
You're gonna feel like garbage. Like the fat's really hard to break down when your body hasn't been processing food, so you don't need a lot of it.
My go-to for most meals is eggs and vegetables. For quick meals. So it sounds like it would probably not be a bad meal to
get. Yeah. Eggs are nice and easy to digest.
Yeah.
Very good questions. Thanks for those, Janet. Let's see. Fasting truly helps you Learn to listen to your body. Hunger is the best seasoning. That's great. Yeah, it's totally true though. Like one of the interesting things about fasting, I didn't talk about it in our slides here, is when you do fast, and I'm not saying it makes you more grateful because you know what being hungry is like, but that's true. When you do fast, I promise you, it changes the way your food tastes in a good way. Like it, you're like, and you're eating something, you're like, man, you know what's really good? Carrots are really good. Like they're really good. I didn't know they were so good. But they are, especially if you haven't, eaten in 24 hours. Like carrots have just such a cool complex level of flavor and stuff, and I think a lot of times our taste buds kind of get numb to what we eat, and we also consciously are pretty mindless when it comes to eating sometimes. And so fasting is a kind of a nice reset to not only put our mind on our food, but also all the mechanisms in our taste buds and our olfactory system and the connections to our brain and stuff. It's like, hey, wake up, guys! We got food to taste, man, and it'll be real good when we taste it because we haven't eaten in a bit. So, yeah, good. Well, keep the questions coming. I'm going to walk through this list of considerations, and then we'll call this a night. You guys have some great questions. So considerations: medical history. Seek your doctor's supervision if you have some questions about these things. I'm a health coach, but I'm not a doctor, and so I can't give you medical advice with regard to your fasting practice. All I can say is that most of you fast every single day just for a short period of time while you sleep. So take that how you will. Now, there are certain medications you have to take with food. They're recommended to take with food. I would definitely talk to your doctor if you're considering a fast, and whether or not maybe just a day without those meds is possible or beneficial, or if taking them without food once wouldn't be a problem. If you're currently being treated for thyroid dysfunction or disorder, specifically if you've had your thyroid taken out or you're on like a high dose of thyroid medications, this regular fasting could be an issue for you. The normal thyroid will deal with the lack of food positively, but an abnormal thyroid could do things like lower your bone density when it comes to fasting. So that could be problematic. And I would recommend talking to your doctor about that. Diabetes, those who have wrestled with fluctuating blood sugar and high insulin and things like that, fasting could put you in a state where your blood sugar crashes very significantly or elevates significantly high. So just having some medical supervision around your fasting practice could be beneficial to you, and your doctor could let you know whether or not you're in a state for diabetes that would be a problem. The case study that we've talked about, he was pre-diabetic in our initial work together, so it wasn't a problem for him. He could do that. And then there are certain types of gout, and then if you have a predisposition toward gallstones, it's been research that in intermittent fasting practice could actually contribute to worse gout or worse gallstones. So that's really interesting. Mental health history: if you have a history of disordered eating or body dysmorphia, those endorphins can be addicting. And so generally, as a practice of fasting, I find many benefits with it. However, the mindset has to be right for it to be positive and beneficial to your body. If fasting becomes restrictive such that food itself isn't better afterward, that's a problem. And so I definitely recommend, if you've not connected with a mental health professional in that respect, talk to them, because I would love for everybody to be able to see the benefits of fasting, but I also don't want fasting to be a bad thing. It should always be a good thing, like exercise. Exercise should always be a good thing. It should always be a positive, productive, beneficial, adapting, life-giving thing, and that's the same thing with fasting. Special populations: women of childbearing age I talked about, and then children and adolescents really don't benefit from fasting. I started experimenting with fasting when I was about 17 years old, and it. I didn't do it in a way that was negative to my growth and development or anything, but around that age is about the youngest that somebody should be playing around with going without food for a day, and seeking the positive benefits of that. But children, it could be developmentally stunting to them. Children's bodies are resilient, but there's no I've joked with my kids, look, hey, someday you might have to go without food, and then you'll be a lot more thankful for dinner, and dad won't have to fight you to get food in you. But you won't hear me starving my kids for a day so that they eat dinner well. Like, that's just not going to happen in my house. And then similarly, women of childbearing age could be not beneficial for the reasons I talked about earlier, but also if you could become pregnant, you don't want to do so in a malnutritioned state. Like, there are positive benefits to your body not getting all the nutrition that it usually has, but there are definitely negative effects on developing fetuses, especially in the early stages of pregnancy with like neural tubes and stuff, when women don't always know that they're pregnant. So I don't generally recommend fasting on that front. I don't think it's good for them. I don't think it's good for potential babies. So support is another consideration. Who's in your corner, and what are you going to tell friends and family when you're the weird one who's not eating today? That's an important thing to kind of map out, as Janet was asking about. What's good to break your fast with. Plan that ahead. Don't be like, well, I've not eaten all day, but Domino's sounds really good. Like, don't do that. And in the same way, don't be like, I'm not eating today, and then you get to work and you're like, I don't really even know what to tell my coworker. You can tell them some crazy guy in this app told you that fasting could be good for you, so you're trying it. You can use me as a scapegoat if you like. But from a spiritual perspective, I believe that the mindset of fasting is such that I want to present myself as no different than when I'm fed. And that's important to me. That's something, Jesus talked about. And since we're talking about health and fitness tonight, I won't get hardcore in Jesus's philosophy around this. But that said, who's your support system? Who's in your corner? You can use people in this group. You can message people. You can use me. That's fine. We can talk about, let me know, hey, Alex, I'm fasting on Thursday. Cool. And I'll ask you how it went and whatnot, or you can whine to me when you're hungry, and that's fine. But what you're telling your friends and family is also important. So my wife is used to me fasting now and then to give my digestive system a break, and it's a really simple conversation like, hey, I'm not eating today. I feel like my digestive system needs a break. Let me know if I'm annoyingly irritable or something, and I'll check myself. And that's the end of that conversation. So make sure you address that for yourself. Now, mindset, the benefits of fasting may be offset by poor attitude. We talked about this in the Faithful 40, that our mindset, our belief system around what we're doing and the stress that we're undergoing can affect the adaptations that come out of that stress. So if we're fasting with a positive mindset, like I've used stepping stones of intermittent fasting, I've used some protein supported fasting, I'm going to do a 24-hour thing, and I'm going to, I don't know, when I'm hungry, I'm going to feast on something else. I'm going to listen to music. I'm going to read a book that I really like. I'm going to call. I did this one fast. It was a 36-hour fast. And every time I was hungry, I would call somebody I loved to ask them how they were doing and tell them I was thankful for them. And like, I called like 20 people that day. I was on the phone for a lot. I was really hungry. That's not usually how fasting goes for me, but for some reason, man, I was also training for a marathon at the time. Not a good combination, but that's a conversation for another day. Anyway, I called like 20 people that day, and it was just having good conversations and stuff. If your mindset is to feast while you're fasting, just not on food, that can be a positive mindset shift for you, because some people walk into a fasting day and they feel like they're depriving themselves all day. And that is not the correct or positive mindset with regard to fasting. Fasting is an abundant mindset. You have all this food. We live in this wonderful modern Western world where most of us have not gone hungry for a long period of time without our consent. And so that said, it's an abundance thing. I choose not to eat today because it's beneficial, not I can't have these things because I'm fasting. Ugh. Like, that's not a good mindset to bring to the table. It's not going to be positive for you, and it's not going to create good adaptations for you. Possible side effects of fasting could be things like headache, lethargy, muscle loss, sleep disturbances. If you've never fasted before, this is more likely going to be something you wrestle with at first, right? So it's like me saying the positive or possible side effects of exercise could be delayed onset muscle soreness, irritability when kids poke you in the quads after squat day or whatever. Those are all things that can happen if you're not used to exercising, and then all of a sudden you take on an exercise program. Similarly, fasting's like that. Your body's deciding how to deal with this new stressor. It's deciding how it's going to prop up your glycogen. It's deciding how your organs need to function differently when you have no food going through your system. And so just be prepared for that. And there's no harm in saying, hey, look, I'm going to fast, but if I get a headache today, that's the end of the fast. I'm going to eat, I'm going to drink some water, and that's okay. Because, there's no benefit of your fast suffering through 4 hours of a headache. Like, what is this fast thing that I'm doing? It gives me a headache every time. So being good to your body and being intentional about your practice is important. What will you eat during and after? I kind of said this earlier, but for those of you who wrestle with that hunger, or you think about food a lot, this will give you an idea of how often you're thinking about food when you're not actually hungry. That's an interesting thing. Like, I'm not hungry, I'm just bored. Why do I need potato chips when I'm bored? Or I'm not hungry, I just had a bad day at work, and I usually stop at the gas station and grab this thing on my way home. Like, why do I don't need to do that. So find yourself something else to eat when you're hungry. And that can be really interesting. And there's a bunch I joked about, calling friends and telling them I'm thankful for them and that I love them. But also something like going for a walk can be a beneficial thing. Everybody else is sitting down to lunch. I'm going to go for a walk. And that sort of thing, giving yourself a different activity to do when you normally would be eating or when you're hungry can be a helpful thing to keep your mindset positive when you've decided to fast. And then as far as training's concerned, don't fast the day of a training session. Like, you don't want to do leg day, back day, chest day, high intensity interval training while you're fasting. If you're a well-trained individual, you can get away with some base cardio. And you can also do some walking, maybe some light calisthenics, maybe some yoga. You can get away with those sorts of things, but nothing that's going to require you to be sore after. I wouldn't do that the day of. And then as far as mesocycles are concerned, I generally don't recommend fasting during hypertrophy training. Hypertrophy is muscle growth training. That's 3 to 5 sets, maybe more sets of 6 to 12 repetitions and 90 seconds rest in between. During that mesocycle, during that period of time, I don't generally recommend fasting as a practice, because it's kind of counter to the whole anabolic growth thing. And studies are kind of shoddy about whether or not that's beneficial or not, or if it's a training effect of deconditioned individuals or just guys or whatever. So I generally just don't recommend that during that time. But other times, endurance training, athletic training, there are some studies that actually have athletes fasting during race week to help them peak, and then they feast prior to their competition and then go kick butt and take names as an additional stressor. I can't say I'm well learned in that. I would just, those studies exist, so you get to know about them. That said, we covered a lot this evening. I kept you several minutes over, so I apologize about that, but I hope that this was beneficial and helpful. I will stick around for questions here, but I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording for those who are watching the recording. This has been Alex Van Houten with Better Daily. Thanks so much for joining us, and until next time, kick butt.